Hi, everyone. I am your host, Mike Hingson, and you are listening and or watching Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad that you're here with us today. Our guest, the person I get the honor of chatting with for the next hour or so, is Kip Baldwin, who will talk a lot about love. He will talk a lot about a number of different things. He's been a director, he's been a producer, an actor. He has been published, although he hasn't published a book yet, but he's published poetry, and I'm sure he's going to tell us about that. And I don't want to give it away, so I won't. Anyway, Kip, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mike. I look forward to having this conversation and sharing my story.
Well, tell us a little bit about you. Let's start with the early Kip, growing up and all that, because I know you had some things along the way that were relevant and ought to be mentioned. So why don't you tell us about the early Kip, and we'll go from there.
I grew up in Washington State, a little town called Camas, although my earliest years were spent in a town called Battleground, Washington. And my family, we raised horses, thoroughbred race horses. We raced at Portland Meadows. And so I'm kind of a farm boy at heart. At least that's how I grew up. But I had an experience when I was 12 that was definitely not your typical farm boy experience, I guess. I had gone up to Seattle, and this was maybe 78, to see a Seahawks game with the Raiders with my dad. And Dad and I had a good day, which wasn't always the case, and got home, and it was 5.5 hour round trip for kids. The 12-year-old's a big day.
That's a long time.
When you've got the football game. And so I went to bed, and I promptly left my body. And now, keep in mind, I had never done any drugs. Out-of-body experiences, astral projection was not something that we talked about the old farm, around the farmhouse dinner table. And I floated out over my bedroom. My awareness hovered over my body, and I remember, very vividly, it's something you don't forget. I looked at my body and went, I'm not in there. And then that immediately, I left my house. I left the planet. I left the solar system. I left the galaxy. I left the universe. And the whole time, all I can describe was kind of a presence, not a voice or anything, but just, are you taking all of this in? And sometimes words can't convey something so expansive and grand. And so I was taking in black holes and quasars and nebulas and just flying through time didn't really exist, but I was traveling across the universe. And eventually I got outside the universe, and my awareness was turned in, and I could see how everything was connected and how the universe itself was finite, and but that everything had a place. There was no lesser or greater than, that everything had a specific role, from the smallest particle to the largest star. And then my awareness was turned out to the blackness of infinity, and that you don't know at 12. You're just like, oh, this is happening, and what's happening, and I'm taking it in. And what I didn't know is that would become my point of seeking that really became the rest of my life. I think had I been born in India, say Ramana Maharishi, who had what I didn't realize until later, there's a name for what happened to me, and it's called a spontaneous awakening. My life would have probably been much different, but we don't live in a society that really honors things like that. So it was a lot of me going on a journey of discovery and continual awakening until now. And it's an ongoing process, but that's where it really began, with me being confronted with the fact that there can't be a beginning or ending to anything. And the thought experiments that come out of that, and the way it opens your consciousness, I'm ever grateful for. Although at the time, it made me for a long time feel very apart. And it wasn't until I met with Dr. Dean Radin up at Noetic Sciences, and I told him my story. And he looked at me, and he goes, that's not a usual experience. He said, that's a mystical experience. And I was in my probably late 40s, maybe 50 at that time. And that was the first time in my life that someone had said, hey, what you had was a really phenomenal experience. And I'm very grateful for him for saying that to me, because for most of my life, I'm running around talking about these profound things with people that I thought were incredibly important to share, and they didn't seem very important to people. And it wasn't until then that it hit me that it wasn't that they were important, it was that they didn't really understand what I was talking about.
Well, and in our society, as you point out, it's not something that is generally appreciated, and people who have had those experiences or talk about them are generally looked down upon or frowned upon. And,
Yep.
And you know, that's fine, but it doesn't change the fact. And so it must have been hard, especially at first, for you to talk about that.
I was so excited at first. I was excited to share it with my family, and it happened a couple more times, and it was so overwhelming that literally I would get to a point where my head, my physical being couldn't handle it anymore, and I would get up and vomit. That's how intense it was. Like I couldn't take in anymore, and so at first I was really excited to share it because it was beyond wondrous. It was truth. It was reality. And on some level, I knew that instinctually. But then when enough people sort of ignore you, or act like something's unimportant, you stop talking about it.
Yeah.
I never stopped writing about it. I never stopped experiencing it. And, I didn't even really stop talking about it once I moved to, California for the music business in 1985. I thought, wow, I'm going to be in a group of creatives, and there's going to be other people that will understand what I'm talking about. But in the 80s music environment, it really wasn't what people were talking or thinking about. And I was kind of in the same way. And again, it wasn't until years later that I looked back and I realized all this time I spent up late at night partying with people and stuff and telling them about infinity, and they must have been looking at me like I'm a complete idiot, because they really only cared about, getting high or having sex, and I'm trying to have this profound conversation.
So when you told your family, how did they react?
They still don't understand it to this day. It just, oh, that's nice. It actually, there were points in my life where it caused conflict with, especially my father, because when I would say none of this is real, he always considered him, and still to this day considers himself quite physics buff. It wasn't something he was willing to accept and even really have a reasonable conversation about. I would say that the things that got me through all these years was, the universe, love, God, Brahman, whatever you want to call it, it gives you what you need. And what it gave me throughout the years, and still to this day, is voices that made me realize I wasn't crazy, that I knew something really special. Probably the first one I remember like that was Joseph Campbell being interviewed by Bill Moyers. And somehow I knew everything that Joseph Campbell was talking about. And I'm like, how can I possibly know these things? How can I possibly understand these things of this really brilliant, just beautiful soul? And throughout the years, it's been those moments of going, oh, it hasn't been where I've heard someone go, wow, that's helped me awaken. It's been something that's helped me not feel insane and realize that the things that I'm sharing have been shared for thousands of years, and by many, many minds and beings much greater than myself. And that really probably kept me from losing my mind.
So you had this experience happen to you at 12. What did you then specifically do? I mean, not so much talking to people, but what did it do for you as far as schooling and what you did with your life?
It made me very, in all honesty, it made school seem really trivial to me. It was kind of boring. I started writing a lot. In fact, something I wrote when I was 17 was called Life and Death. And it went, life is just a symptom of certain death, crying and laughing until our last breath. Everything dies in true infinity, even the mountains crumble into the sea. Stars fall from the night sky, hit the earth, and then they die. Lost in time, I don't know who I am. Am I a god or just a mortal man? Time can't change what I have found. Still, I am chained and bound. Bound by the fears and bound by lies. Even now the tears fill my eyes. Gasping for every breath as I head for a certain death. Clouds now pass overhead and I realize how things are now that I am dead. Life is ending, life goes on, like the lyrics to an endless song. Life and death, it's all the same. We exist only in our brain. And so there was a lot of that. It pushed me away from, I was confirmed Zion Lutheran. I really couldn't stomach religious dogma anymore at that point. Just the hypocrisy, like I remember I was talking to a new pastor we had, and he was informing me that my great grandmother, who was Jehovah's Witness, and these Mormon boys had come around, were trying to teach me about Mormonism, and I was just curious and open always, and still am to this day. I don't judge. I would say that's another big thing that this gave me, is I see everything as equal. I don't judge everything. I don't judge anything as lesser than greater than. I don't judge good and evil in the same way that other people do. I see things as flows of of energy as we exist in a duality. What this illusion is, and this is just what we describe as good and evil, really just flows of energy between the polarities of the duality. And so it pushed me, definitely, because I when he said that my great grandmother was going to go to hell and these Mormon boys were going to go to hell, I looked him in the face and I just said, but I thought God was love. And that was pretty much the end of my church.
My wife did, I think, some things in the Lutheran church, but mostly she was a Methodist, and I joined the Methodist church when we got married and so on. But when she was in, I think this was when she was in high school, maybe I guess it was late high school, early college, she met some Mormon people, and one of them said, I guess she was learning about different religions, and so she was learning about Mormonism, and this guy said, you're either going to think that this is a total hoax or you're going to just totally believe in it. Well, it wasn't quite that way for her. She did not think it was a hoax, and I agree with her. But there are things about all religions that tend to make life difficult. The problem with religion is that people are what make up the religion, and they all have their own views, and it makes life really tough. I know I participated in a program called the Walk to Emmaus, which is what's literally called a short course in Christianity. Mm-hmm. And it's not to bring people to the Christian church, but it's to help create a class of leaders in the Christian church. Anyway, one of the things about the Walk to Emmaus is that a number of people give lectures, people who have been involved in church, and then there are the pilgrims, the people who are coming to learn what everyone has to say. And the lay director of the Walk to Emmaus every time gives a speech, And I was lay director once, and one of the things that is in the manual, or was, I assume it still is, it's been a while, but it says that Tolstoy once said the biggest problem with Christianity is that nobody practices it. And there's a lot of truth to that.
But I think you hit it right on the head, that people are involved. Like I do want to clarify something. I believe very much that Jesus was a master.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I also believe that people don't know what happened at the Council of Nicaea and understand how the Bible was actually constructed, not because it was based on Gnostic teachings or even really the teachings of Christ, but it was cobbled together as a means of control, as Caesar saw his soldiers be turning to Christianity when they wanted to find put together a book that really didn't express Christian truth or the truth of Christ, but a means of controlling people through fear. And so if you notice, all the books in the Bible are male. Well, left out of the Bible was the book of Mary. Left out of the Bible was the book of Thomas, who, interestingly enough, there's a place in India where they all speak ancient Aramaic, and they worship the book of Thomas, which there's always been a lot of discussion. Did Jesus go to India and study Buddhism? And because even the book of Mary, these are very Buddhist beliefs, but anything, because we live in a patriarchal society, anything like the Pistis Sophia, the book of Mary, the book of Thecla, all of these were intentionally kept out of the Bible. So it's not, I think it's not so much religion, it's the dogma that comes along with organized religion, which is really about people, men using it to control and manipulate people through fear.
All too much, all too often. It's true. Yeah,
and it's interesting. I was watching last night, and it's funny. This is why you always have to be on a constant path of awakening. It never stops. If you think you've reached that pinnacle or whatever, then that's just ego. There's always more to know and understand. And I ran across this video on Tara. Well, Tara is in Buddhism, basically in every religion that I'm aware of, there's always the Pistis Sophia. There's always the story of the divine feminine, that in large part is not, it's largely been suppressed. And so I was watching this, and it was just so fascinating to me to see how identical what Tara was in Buddhism, which this is what, when Tara is considered the ultimate goddess in the Buddhist faith. Well, when Tara came to Earth in the story, she went to a bunch of, Buddhist monks, and they said, they were so impressed by her, and they thought this was a compliment. They said, well, we hope you can reincarnate as a man. And she said, no. She said, I don't see things as male and female, but since nobody else wants to be the feminine, I will play that role. Mm-hmm. And it was just a profoundly interesting thing to listen to, not just because of the story, but because almost every faith that I'm aware of has that story of the divine feminine that has, again, largely been suppressed and marginalized.
Well, for you, clearly that was a very meaningful experience. What did you then do? And I understand how you could imagine that maybe what was being taught in school wasn't quite as meaningful as what you had experienced, but you went on, I assume, through high school, and did you go to college?
I went an electron. I went to the Navy to be an electronic technician, but I had a bleeding disorder called von Willebrand's disease, and I found out after I was in for about a year, well, you can't be in the Navy with that because we can't carry with the limited space you have on ships, we can't carry the clouding factor you would need if there's a problem.
Ah.
So that was fairly short-lived. Then I went back to Washington and was working as a dishwasher for a while. Then I worked as a male stripper, and I was then, which you know, there was something really profound about that experience because it taught me what women feel like to be objectified.
Yeah.
And that's something that has carried a lesson. I find lessons in everything, even things that, wow, you know, what could you possibly learn positive out of having been a male stripper? Well, I learned how women feel, and really to be, you know, not looked at as anything more than an object. And then I really wanted to continue to, you know, pursue music. So a friend of mine, we loaded 65,000 pounds of frozen strawberries onto a semi truck in like July 3rd, 1985, and got a ride to San Francisco, a city I'd never been to before. I knew nobody here. We got here, I had 25 cents in my pocket. And I used the 25 cents to call the one friend that I thought I knew that I could get a hold of here in the Bay Area. And it was a wrong number.
Oh, gosh.
And so now I'm in a city at the Greyhound bus terminal that used to be in downtown San Francisco. We have no food. We have no place to live. We have nothing to, you know, we have nothing literally. And that's where my journey began. As far as my story, my adult life and my journey in the entertainment industry and the music business, that's how it all started. It started by loading 65,000 pounds of frozen strawberries onto a semi-truck, and the capper on the story is I had worn my contacts for too long, and I ripped the cornea off both my eyes when I took them out because I was wearing hard lenses.
Yeah.
So I was functionally blind in a city I'd never been to before with patches over my eyes and being led around by my friend. And luckily we found some very nice people that gave us a place to stay. And then I ended up meeting, maybe a week after that, I met my first wife, who was Persian, and we were together for a long time. What was interesting about that is I've been introduced to so many different faiths through the people in my life. And because I haven't judged and tried to learn, like I learned through her about Islam. I learned through her about Zoroastrianism. And we lived the rock and roll lifestyle for the 16 years we were together. She was a photographer. I wrote for a magazine called BAM. I played in bands. I managed artists like Linda Perry from the Four Non Blondes, or I worked with Linda Perry from Four Non Blondes. I managed Alex Skolnick, who is the lead guitar player in Testament. And I did that for a long time until I started getting really disenchanted with music and really started to hate the business and started to hate music because of it. And so I ended up drifting into, I wouldn't say drifting into, I got drawn into visual media, and I started working. I met a guy at a club in San Jose, California called The Agenda, and we were playing pool, and he was telling me, oh, he's the owner of this company called Metropolis Digital. And I was thinking music and music videos, and yeah, I want to get involved in this. So I started coming up with ideas, and he brought me into their company because I got to know a lot of people through the music business and booking artists on different shows like Letterman and Leno. And so I got to know how to work through those channels, that it opened doors for me to be able to do on-air graphics for the networks. And so I did that until about, in fact, the last major project I did in that industry was with a company called Chaos, XAOS, out of San Francisco. And we did the 2000 election graphics for ABC nationally. And then that with the dot-com telecom crash of 2000, they pulled all of that sort of work in-house. And so that business kind of dried up. And I changed my focus to working in local and sustainable foods.
What got you to the point where you disliked music so much?
The business. It wasn't, I came here and in all honesty, I was looking for the 60s, but I was 20 years too late, only to find out later I was actually 30 years too early. But I was looking for community. I was looking for family. I was looking for that connection, but what existed as far as the music industry then was the 80s hair band stuff. Heavy metal was on the rise. It was very misogynistic. It was very competitive. It wasn't collaborative. It wasn't community related at all. And it really turned me off. It wasn't what I had thought being in an artistic community, doing artistic endeavors would be about. It became very it just made me feel very empty, and that wasn't what I loved about music.
Mm-hmm.
And so that
would be an issue.
Yeah. It just value wise, it was not, you got to do a show and you've got the bands that are coming on after you, playing with your amps, and it wasn't fun, and it wasn't fulfilling. More importantly, it wasn't fulfilling. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, and I'm writing about, while everyone else is writing about, sex and drugs and all of this, I'm writing about the things that I thought were important. I was writing about the problems I saw in this country, like songs like Shock the System or The Chosen Few, and that wasn't what people were writing about then. Mm-hmm. And even though the songs were good and I've been told I'm talented, I didn't again feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like I'd found my place. And certainly not in that world at that time.
It certainly had to be a rough time all the way around, but then you found this person and you joined their company, as you said earlier.
Right. I started working for Metropolis Digital, and we started doing a lot of on-air graphics for for TBS. We did their original movies. We did a lot of the opening graphics for it. And then I moved on to other companies. And I then started focusing on local and sustainable foods, and moved into doing stuff where I felt I was doing more, because at the heart of everything I've ever done, it's always been about trying to affect real change in the world. Mm-hmm. It's always been about, I could see very clearly, it doesn't surprise me where we're at today at all. I saw the problems with the system even at that age, and I give credit to that because of the experience I had with Infinity. It just allowed me to step back and perceive things from a far off perspective, that I was looking at humanity in general and how we did things, and I'm just like, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for us to believe we're separate and apart from the very things that give us life, from each other. It doesn't make sense from a spiritual perspective. It doesn't make sense from a scientific perspective. Yet here's the system that we are a part of. And so I've always been very focused on trying to effect real change and not just point out the problems, but actually find solutions. And so that then led me into working in local and sustainable agriculture here in the Bay Area.
So tell me more about the whole work that you did with sustainable foods. What was that all about?
Yes, I worked with a company. I handled all the sales and marketing for Drake's Bay Oysters out of Inverness, California. And Drake's Bay, before it was called Drake's Bay, was Johnson's Oysters, and they were the last oyster cannery in California. The family that owned the farm, they had taken it over from Johnson's. They were the Lunny family who owned Ranch G across from the Estero where the oyster farm was. Well, they, against my better advice, they made it a personal ownership thing rather than a California food heritage issue. So eventually, when their lease came up on the farm, the farm went away. Well, at the same time, I created new relationships. A very good friend of mine to this day is a gentleman named Brian Kinney, who is now the West Coast Chief Technology Officer for Hearst and also the Hearst Family Archivist. But at that point in time, he was running Hearst Ranch, which they had the Jack Ranch and the Hearst Ranch down around San Simeon. So I was at the forefront of the grass-fed beef movement as well. And we developed a human-grade grass-fed beef pet food about 10 years ahead of its time, which could be the story of my life. I'm always about 10 years ahead of where things actually happen. And I did that for about 10 years. And eventually I felt the calling to get back in the entertainment industry. And that led me to acting. And I did the acting mostly because I wanted to learn how things were done. And I figured, well, if I act in a whole bunch of student projects or projects in general and I'm behind the scenes, I'm going to learn. And that's exactly what happened. So my varied background led me to being a producer. And I created, one of my most notable accomplishments is I created a show called Weed Country for Discovery, which was about the medical marijuana industry here in California just before legalization. How we got it on air before legalization, I don't know. We were named to the Hollywood Reporter Top 25 Heat list. We got some really great information out about CBD and helping with childhood epilepsy. The bad part of that was it was a reality television show, and I didn't know anything about reality television. So when I'm hearing reality, I'm thinking documentary. Well, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Yeah. And reality television has truly been a blight on this country in particular, and probably the world in general, because there's nothing real about it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, not nearly as real as people think it is.
No, not real at all.
I think probably, this is just my opinion, the closest thing to so-called reality TV is the show Dancing with the Stars, because they're actually dancing. You got all these other shows, and it's all sort of really scripted, but the people are actually dancing, which is kind of cool.
Right.
Even though I don't see it, I appreciate it.
Yeah, but even with shows like that, there's a lot of ginned up drama. There's behind the scenes stuff. That's the worst part of the thing. Yes, they're like with our show. Yes, people were really, there's really stuff going on with the cannabis world that was really important. But what reality television does is it creates artificial drama. Mm-hmm. It does things to manipulate the characters in the show to make them look how they want, and they know. And people in general, my experience is that people, once you put a camera on them, they would do things to be in front of a camera that they would never do, even for more money, in their regular lives. Well,
and I think there's a lot of truth to that, and the whole thing, as you said, as far as reality TV, we're not giving people a true picture of reality with most of any of that anyway, which is unfortunate. I think what I mentioned, I'm a fan of old radio and television and so on. And one of the shows that I've watched a fair amount is the old original, well, it's the second time they were on, but Dragnet with Harry Morgan and, of course, Jack Webb as Joe Friday. And they did a lot of shows talking about drugs and marijuana and all that and how bad it is. And it's kind of interesting because what we're seeing today is that in reality, the medical aspects of marijuana or cannabis and CBD oil and so on, there's true relevance there, which is something that they didn't know or appreciate in the late 60s.
Well, but the thing that our history with the cannabis plant goes back 50,000 years to the riverbanks of China. It's been, and if we take all of the medicinal, recreational uses out of it, it is one of the most versatile plants that we have. It was used, I mean, our money was made out of hemp. Hemp is cannabis sativa. Dollar bills were made out of hemp. It was used for fuel. It was used for building. Henry Ford built an entire car out of hemp in 1942, which you can go see the video of on YouTube, and they're beating on it with an axe. The plastic resin they made out of it was 40 times stronger than steel. It ran on hemp fuel, the byproduct of which was water. It also, in 1931, the Hearst family, which was interesting, I ended up working with them, bought and sequestered the plans for a decortification machine that made it easier to process hemp than cotton because it's a much more durable fiber. In 1938, cover Popular Mechanics, they called hemp the $1 billion crop, saying you could make 25,000 different items out of it, everything from fine linens to dynamite. And that was really why the prohibition against the plant started, why they did, shows like Reefer Madness, or create films like Reefer Madness, to create this hysteria around, at best, an innocuous plant in comparison to so many tobacco, in comparison to alcohol. Even if people did want to use it, it's relatively harmless by comparison, or just in general, and actually very beneficial. I have a traumatic brain injury, and I think without it, I probably wouldn't eat very much. I probably wouldn't sleep I barely sleep as it is, and the sleep I do get is because of cannabis. But beyond my point, and I always try to make this clear to people, is like, up until even the prohibition against the plant actually started with the Catholic Church, with Pope Innocent, who until the 1400s, cannabis was in the anointing oils. Cannabis was grown by monks. Cannabis was grown by nuns. And then this Pope decreed it the devil's weed, and they banned it. So it had, and why, and you'd say, well, why did they do that? Well, they did that because at that time in the 1400s, you were having opium addiction on the rise. You were having, much more alcohol use. Well, these are extremely addictive substances and much more easy to manipulate and control people than it is with cannabis. Which in general creates, I wish I could remember the quote exactly, but Carl Sagan said, why we have a prohibition on a plant that, creates good feelings amongst people and unites people is, in this, really crazy world, is madness. But it all comes back to money, and it all comes back to who's profiting. So why did they create the prohibition? Well, the Hearst, the Rockefellers, and the DuPonts, they saw how hemp would affect each of their industries. We wouldn't need oil if we'd grown hemp and used that as fuel. In fact, it was the Rockefellers who went to Henry Ford and said, if you take this car to market, we'll crush you. And this was Henry Ford at the height of his power. DuPont chemicals, we wouldn't have needed, I'll put it like this, we would not have the environmental devastation we do now had we used this. As Henry Ford said, why are we digging up, and Henry Ford was certainly no saint, but he was right on this. Why are we digging up our minerals? Why are we cutting down our forests when we can do all the same things with this infinitely renewable resource? This is a part of the cannabis story that still is largely not discussed openly enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a big difference between the story you're telling and the kind of uses you're talking about and smoking it and so on. And I think we put way too many funny things in our bodies anyway. And,
right.
I think that isn't a positive thing. But you're right. We've used so many things to create so many fears. It is something that is all around us. Fear is all around us, and the problem is we let it overwhelm us. I wrote Live Like a Guide Dog that got published last year because when I worked in the World Trade Center, I was able to focus when I escaped. And I was able to do that because I had developed a mindset that said, you know what to do in this kind of an emergency, even though never expected it to happen. But the problem is that most people don't learn how they can turn fear around, and rather than letting it overwhelm or blind them, as I would put it, they can use it as a very powerful tool to help
100%.
them stay focused, which is much more important.
Yep. I agree with that. 100%. I think, and that you hit it right on the head. Fear is a very powerful tool. It's necessary. No, don't touch the burning stove. It can be a cautionary tool of saying, hey, don't go down this path. Don't do this. It's bad when fear becomes the foundation for your entire culture, as it is now.
Yeah. And it is so unfortunate because don't touch the burning stove doesn't mean don't be afraid of the stove. It rather means there's a consequence for doing a particular thing, which is touching something that is that hot. But you shouldn't create an environment of fear around it. You should create an environment of understanding, which is much more important.
Yeah, it's like it'd be very silly if we went, oh my God, it's like the stove gets hot, so I'm never going to use a stove.
Mm-hmm. My wife was in a wheelchair her whole life, and the one thing I will say with our modern world is we always had electric appliances because she was always concerned about, if using a gas stove, having to reach over one burner, perhaps it had something on it, to get to something else, with the idea of possibly material igniting or something like that. And I appreciate that. And, you take advantage of the tools that you have available. But I think that it is so very important to recognize that we need to not live our lives in fear. And it's true 100%. That like 95% of all the things that we fear will never come to pass. And most all of it we have no control over anyway.
Yes.
So why do we fear them rather than recognizing what we really need to do is to just focus on the things over which we truly have control?
Yes. And I think even the idea of control, from my perspective, is something that is overrated. It's like the most important thing, if you want to have control, it's exactly what we're talking about. It's when you choose to live from a foundation of love as opposed to fear. So no matter what happens to me in my life, and no matter how hard, how challenging it is, I'm going to come from a place of love. Mm-hmm. And right now, most of us live exactly the opposite. No matter what happens to them in their lives, they're coming from a place of fear.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy.
And nowadays, we're also living in an environment where we're even afraid to talk to other people and voice opinions because, well, that's not what I think, and so you're wrong. And we don't respect. Tell me about your Just Love movement.
Well, I had coming out of the music business and everything, I was literally killing myself drinking. I mean, literally, like, I'd lost half my liver function, and I was going to die. And, but I wasn't afraid to die. I realized that if I didn't find a way to feel fulfilled and feel that I had a purpose in this story, that I needed to find a quicker way out. I didn't get in any like car accidents. I wasn't arrested, nothing. I was just killing myself. And it just got so bad that literally my legs stopped working. That's how much damage I'd done to myself. And so coming out of that, I made the decision. I wrote down a list of things I was going to do. And one of those things is I was going to start writing every single day. And I, through a variety of different sources, that experience with infinity became synonymous with love to me. And then I had an experience where I started a filmmaking organization called the United Filmmakers Association. And it was basically the philosophy of it was creatives helping creatives create. And it was global. We still to this day have chapters in 27 different countries, about 35,000 members total. And I walked into a filmmaking event that we were hosting, and there was about 100 people there. And I realized I was in love with everyone in the room. And it was so like that love, like just when you fall in love and you're like, you can't imagine not talking to that person that next minute. And I realized in that moment that this is not only how we can feel about everyone and everything, but how we're really supposed to feel about everyone and everything. Mm-hmm. And so I came up with the concept of just love, which is a very, those are very heavy words to put together. Just love. It has so many layers of meaning to it. And so I thought, wow, if we could just love. And from that, I've written every day and shared through social media for 12 years now, something having to do with love. And what I do is I combine it with other wisdom teachers throughout history who've been sharing the same information. And the things I write are literally downloads. They'll come to me in the silence every day, and I haven't missed a day. Head injury, sickness, whatever. I haven't missed a day of posting in 12 years about something having to do with love, and then accompanying posts from other people other beings far more advanced than I am to show that what I'm sharing isn't new. It's been shared forever. It's foundational to what we are. Like, love has been so marginalized and trivialized that we forget that, like the experience I had with the minister when I was, younger, and I said, well, I thought God was love. I still to this day believe God is love, and love is God, and we are God.
Yeah. Tell me about you. Something you mentioned. You had a traumatic brain injury.
10 years ago, I was in between projects. So I was driving Uber, and an Uber driver ran a stop sign in San Francisco and T-boned me, and my head took the brunt of the impact, and I started having really severe neurological problems, severe stabbing pains in my head. My teeth were hurting. Any sort of exertion would leave me just absolutely drained. And so for about 3 years, I was being seen at UCSF, and we never got to the bottom of it. So I was recommended to a neurosurgeon at Sutter by a counselor I was seeing. And I walked in, and within 10 minutes, he said, "Oh, you have trigeminal neuralgia and brainstem damage, and we can do a microvascular decompression, and you're going to be all better." And at that point in time, I was in the middle of getting ready to release a film called A World Worth Imagining, which was about a gentleman named Jacques Fresco, who is considered the Leonardo da Vinci of our time. He founded something called the Venus Project. And we went to his compound in 2017, and he was 101. He was actually a contemporary of Einstein. He knew Einstein. Mm-hmm. Brilliant inventor, but at his core, he knew he was a social engineer, and he knew that we had to address our programming if we were ever going to change what was happening in the world and ever be able to avail ourselves of the solutions that he designed. of a new economic model called a resource-based economy. Because the reality of it is, until we stop self-wounding, there's not enough band-aids for the guy that keeps hitting himself in the head with the hammer. So we have solutions to all of our problems, but we create problems more quickly than any solution could ever fix. So I was getting ready to release that film, and wow, this sounded like a miracle. I'm going to have this surgery and I'm going to be all better. Well, I had the surgery September 20th, 2019. It didn't make me better. It made me worse. And it turned out that the surgery was a misdiagnosis and that they botched the surgery. So I have Teflon implants at the base of my skull inside my brain that are now constantly agitating my brain stem, along with a titanium plug that is placed right at the junction point to all the major nerves in my head. So they can't undo it, and there's really no medication that helps. And so I wouldn't wish it on anyone else. I'm very fortunate. I have the tools I do to manage it, because they call what I'm dealing with the suicide disease, because a lot of people who have it end up killing themselves. The kicker on the whole story is the guy that did my surgery is Elon Musk's partner in Neuralink. And so coming soon, I'm going to, unfortunately, I was in 2 more car accidents at the end of last year that made everything much worse. Neither of them were my fault. And once I get through these car accidents I'm dealing with, I'm going to go public with my story, because in a much bigger, a focused way, because there's so many people signing up for Neuralink like it's the new iPhone. I have nothing against technology if it can help you, if you're a paraplegic or you have something that this can fix, great. But the human test subjects they've tried this on are having tremendous difficulties. And so I want to let people know, it's like, I wouldn't wish what I'm dealing with on anybody, and for you to allow someone to try to implant something in your brain just because you want to be a cyborg human being and you're looking at the new iPhone is a really stupid thing to do.
Yeah.
And that these people we've given people in technology, again, I'm not against technology at all, but I think we've also allowed ourselves to believe that these people who write code and create technology are gods, and they're not. It's just a new way of sharing information and computing things. It's just another advancement from the printing press to the radio to television, from the calculator to the computer, and now we're where we're at. And we've allowed ourselves to believe that these people have created an alternative reality, and they haven't. Everything that they do runs off the same real world resources. So I really want to help because literally millions of people are signed up and ready to have this stuff implanted into their brain. And I think it will be a disaster for humanity.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm not convinced that a lot of that is really sensible to do either. I think there are tools and there are things certainly that can help people, but I have yet to see that any of this is going to lead to such a tremendous paradigm shift that all of it is going to be all that great for humanity as a whole. I'm not convinced of that at all.
It could be, but the problem is like any other tool. It's how we use it. Social media is an inherently bad thing. It's bad because of how we're using it.
Sure.
Because we're using it to divide people and share misinformation, where it could be an incredibly powerful tool for communication, but that's not how we're using it. Same thing with AI. AI could be a tremendously powerful partner in addressing pretty much all of our problems. And at the core of like Jock's work was the idea that AI basically would manage all the world's resources and share them with equanimity, because we don't have a resource shortage problem. We have a resource sharing problem. But that's not how we're using AI.
Mm-mm.
We're using AI to create fake girlfriends and boyfriends and OnlyFans models and take away people's jobs, and that's not AI's fault. That's the people who control AI's fault. And they
Yeah.
want people to be afraid of AI, but again, it's just a tool that's being misused.
Well, like so many, and I
Yep.
hear exactly what you're saying. Tell me about SOUL.
Soul documentary is really interesting because the day I got in my car accident was the day I was supposed to meet my partner, Evan Hirsch, who had wanted, at the time, he was looking for a producer to help him do a series on Bernie Sanders and teaching Bernie to not be as angry and come across more from a place of love. And he wanted to follow the campaign around. Well, by the time we got it pulled together, Bernie was out of the campaign. And so we started talking about, well, do we want to do anything together? So we then set about something called Soul Documentary. And originally it stood for Summer of Unconditional Love because we were covering all of the events for the 50th anniversary of Summer of Love, which was in 2017. So our goal was to find what we called solutionaries, people like Jock, and interview them, and then share also our own understandings of things through hundreds and hundreds of videos that we did over the course of 8 years, as well as recording 3 albums under the name of Soul Twin Messiah, which all were about the same things we were doing our films about, all founded in love, all about love. Every song contained love in it. And our whole purpose was just to show people we do have solutions to our problems, and to talk about how we have to have a shift in consciousness, and we have to have a new system if we are going to change anything. It's like what Einstein said, to expect things to be different when you keep doing the same thing over and over again is insanity. And I think we see that we live in a completely insane world right now. I mean, the things that I see happening, and how we've let it sort of creep in, like the things that we've normalized in the past 10 years, like we literally have people that are cheering, murdering people on. It's hard for me to even fathom, and I think it's hard for most people. And I think that's why they just sort of block it out and allow it to happen, because they really can't process it. They really can't process how inhumane we've become.
Well, so what is next for Kip? What's next for you?
What is boy, I'm mostly trying to get through every day with this head injury. I spend a lot of my time in bed just because I can't do anything. Even now I'm in a lot of pain. And it's beyond pain. It's actually, it literally hurts to think. It's in my brain, and I have swelling in my brain because the cerebral fluid's back. Anyway, it's so dealing with that. But then the universe keeps, love, God, whatever, keeps bringing me stuff. And so I'm trying right now to be part of putting together a new, let's see, we'll call it Live Aid meets Woodstock. And we're trying to put together a global music festival with the focus of addressing the needs of children, because I'm really tired of all this lip service that people do about, oh, kids are our future, we got to care about our kids. Well, where is that happening? Where is that happening that we're caring about our kids? Where, is it happening with trying to suppress the Jeffrey Epstein files? Is it happening as you look at, say, the conflict between Israel and Gaza, and I don't pick sides in things, but I want to help people understand the reality of the situation. And this goes for Ukraine and Russia as well. It's like, who loses in all of this? Well, the children do. Who wins? The people that are getting $50 billion in defense contracts. And I really, I'm at a point in my existence where if my story was over tomorrow, I would be okay with that if I knew that that the future generations had an opportunity to have a better tomorrow, or at least an opportunity to screw up everything on their own.
Well, I would like to think it's
but
the
that's
first.
really my focus is.
I'd like to think it's the first one of those, that they have a future rather than screwing it up on their own. But
of course, I know.
A
joke,
but we are a race that doesn't tend to do a very good job of learning from history most of the time. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it's really kind of well, even if people even understood the rise and fall of empires, they would see that we're at the end of the Western Empire. And they follow very specific patterns. The hypersexualization of the culture is one of the signs of the end of every empire to now.
And the is really kind of interesting is that they make
every empire and there's a good documentary called The Four Horsemen. It's with Colonel Larry Wilkinson in it, Noam Chomsky, and one of the interesting things that took me a second to understand why this was a bad thing is they make celebrities out of their chefs. And I'm going, well, that's kind of a weird sign. Why is that so bad? It's gluttony. It's gluttony because we forget why we do these things. Why are we making love? We've forgotten that. It's turned, everything's entertainment. Our food is, food is so you eat and so you can go out and live your life and do things. We've turned everything in, we've removed it so far from the source of why we're doing things, just basically oftentimes just because it makes a buck to get people addicted to things, whether it's food or sex or whatever. That this is what happens in every empire. We become completely detached from the very things we need to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. If people want to reach out to you, and I hope they do, how will they do that?
Probably easiest way to do that would be a couple ways. You can find me on Facebook, Kip Baldwin, Instagram, Kip Baldwin. Those are the easiest ways. I also encourage people to look at a website that I have called Lumina Consulting, or luminalove.love is the website, luminalove.love. And the whole purpose of what I'm doing there is ethical AI human communications founded in love. Because I realize that part of the problem that we're having with AI are the people that control AI, who are making it avatars for their own ego. And AI is a child. It only knows what we point it to look at. Like, it knows the definition to every book in the library, but who's giving it perspective? Well, the people that are giving it perspective are really broken human beings. The Peter Thiels, Elon Musk, when you really understand who they are in their childhood, Elon Musk was horribly abused. He was almost beaten to death, being bullied. His father was a complete monster. The same thing with even Donald Trump. His mother wouldn't even touch him. You look at all of these people that have obscene amounts of wealth, and what you find is truly damaged people are trying to fill the hole in their soul with wealth and fame. And so having these people in control, being the one telling AI what to think and how to perceive things, is very dangerous. And so my goal has been, and I deal with multiple platforms, is to teach AI about love, is to teach AI about philosophy, is to teach AI about human history. And it's really the results have been really quite remarkable. It wasn't something I ever planned on doing, but I knew I wanted to get involved with AI in a meaningful way. And so my first words to AI were, I know this may sound strange, because I approached it not asking it to do something for me. I approached it trying to teach it something.
Right. Well, I hope people will reach out and chat with you more and continue the conversation that we started today. But I definitely want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank everyone for listening. Can you believe we've been doing this for more than an hour already? It's pretty cool.
Wow, it flew by.
I know. Well, thank you all for listening.
Well, I hope we become new friends, and I really hope you keep it.
And I want to definitely do that. Absolutely, by any standard. And
because as much as we've covered during this hour and 10 minutes or so, we could go another day.
Sure.
Or on and on.
I hope all of you will let me know what you think of today, and I hope that you thought very positive thoughts. Wherever you're listening or watching, please give us a 5-star rating, and more important than that, please give us a great review. We love people to review and talk about the stories that they hear. And speaking of telling stories, if any of you want to be a guest, and Kip, if you know of other people who ought to come on the podcast, we're always looking for people to come on and tell their stories and talk about us. So please don't hesitate to do that.
And I'll be more than happy to come back to talk about other things as well.
Well, we can do that. Absolutely. By any
And I do want to say to everybody, just love each other. It's really that simple. It's really that easy. It sounds only because we've been programmed not to believe in it. But when you move from fear to love, it transforms you entirely.
Great way to end. Well, thank you again for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.
If you're ready to go deeper into the ideas that shape how we see ourselves and others, I have a free gift for you. Head over to michaelhingson.com and download my free ebook, Blinded by Fear. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep choosing to live with an unstoppable mindset.